Welcome to the Gold Standard here on the 440 Sports Network. My name is Braden Gall, and you can get to me on twitter.com @BradenGall.
And I'm Emma Lingen. You can get to me on Twitter @Emma_Lingen.
I'm Michael Gallagher. You can get to me on Twitter @MGSports_.
And, of course, some housekeeping before we get into an NHL Draft Preview. What we learned and why people were commenting very strangely about the Florida Panthers championship that I think may tie back to Andrew Burnett. Maybe not. I want to get your opinion on that. Got a couple of small trades, some Hall of Fame news, and, of course, our subscriber questions from our brand new community, Lower Broad Hockey on Substack. Make sure you go check that out. Also, make sure you check out Emma's work with Jeremy Kagover over on the It's All Your Fault podcast out Mondays. You guys had an interview with Adam Kleiman of NHL.com, I believe. So go check that out as well. So lots of stuff to do on the show today. Again, Lower Broad Hockey on Substack. Go sign up, become a member. We're going to have some premium draft content and coverage for you guys this week as well. We're going to have some, I think we got some scouting stuff, Mike, right, coming up for you for the subscribers out there, correct?
We do, yes. I got a Q&A with a scout from McKean's Hockey. We also have a couple other stories coming from that interview. We got in depth about Matthew Wood and Zachary Leroux, Joachim Kemmel, Askarov. It was nice to talk and get a scouting perspective on some of those players that we are pretty familiar with.
So the back half of the show, we'll talk about some trades. Igor Afanasyev has been moved to Hall of Fame, of course. David Poile and Shea Weber. We'll get into that in a little bit, but we'll get some subscriber questions from Lower Broad Hockey answered today on the show. And of course, some of those will tie into the draft as well. But I just want to get quickly started here. And if you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, please, as well. Twitter, Facebook, podcast, wherever you're listening to us, please rate, review, subscribe, share, all that great stuff. We really do appreciate it. And if you want to jump into the comment section, will be available. But real quickly here, I enjoyed the series. Congrats to Florida. I had a quick question for you guys, though, because Sean McDonough, the play-by-play guy, and by the way, I think it was the most watched non-original six Stanley Cup final in like years, maybe ever, on ESPN or ABC. So their ratings were way up. Obviously, McDavid coming, leading Edmonton from behind. I'm curious. Sean McDonough said it on the broadcast as soon as they started skating the cup around. And I think Barry Zito said it as well in his interview following the win as well. Like they both were very clear about how, well, they couldn't win that way. They couldn't win a championship that way. They couldn't win with that style of hockey. And obviously Andrew Burnett was the interim before they went and got Paul Maurice. And I'm just curious, he was only there for a short period of time. I don't think they're referring directly to him, but he certainly plays a different style than I would say that the Panthers won the championship with this year. But he didn't get the job either. And so I'm curious, I don't think it's a huge indictment of Andrew Burnett at all or a system, but it was interesting to me that that's how everyone sort of referred to the direction the Panthers franchise went. And I wanted to see if I'm crazy for tying that to, Andrew Burnett or some sort of style in any way, shape, or form. Am I crazy for that?
I don't think you're crazy. I mean, I don't think it's for sure an indictment of Andrew Burnett. I think it was more, I took it as more of a commentary on the direction the franchise has gone in terms of the players that they brought in and talking about the style of hockey. It is interesting though, because the Panthers, everyone says the Panthers are defense first and defense wins championships. It's like, okay, yeah, but they can also score. It's not like they're, the John Hines Predators that only played defense and didn't score goals. So it's just, I don't know. I think
John Hines catching strays. I like it.
I just think that it's more of a commentary on you can't go all offense and not put any investment into the defensive side of the game. So I don't know that that's an Andrew Burnett thing. I think it's just a kind of a prevailing idea in hockey, honestly.
I don't take it as an indictment of Burnett. If anything, maybe it's that this Panthers team was a little bit more calm, relaxed, a little bit more cerebral, whereas the 21 team that Andrew Burnett took over as the interim head coach, they played a little bit faster, the tempo, the pace, everything that he brought to the Predators this year. Maybe that was something they were alluding to. I also think too, you got to look at the way the rosters are constructed. Like they leaned heavily this year on Reinhart, they had on Kachuk, on Barkov or Hagee. They didn't have Kachuk the last time when he was there. They had Jonathan Huberdeau, which I know he put up a lot more points, but Huberdeau and Kachuk are different style of players. Huberdeau may put up more points, but you could argue that Kachuk is more important to this Panthers team. You also look at they had Anthony Duclair, they had Sam Bennett, Marchment. Lundell was in his rookie year in that 2021 team. Now he's a very good third line center, probably going to get paid a lot in free agency hits. They had Evan Rodriguez playing a really good role, and he did the same thing in Colorado last year. I think that's something that kind of came out of nowhere. Gustav Forsling, Brandon Montour. I mean, they had a bunch of guys step up and play. I don't want to say like depth roles, but play bigger secondary roles on the roster this year than they did in 2021. And I think moving on from Andrew Brunette after that year, I think that was more about wiping the slate clean from anything that had to do with the previous regime, just in the circumstances that Andrew Brunette even got the job. I think that was more about getting Paul Maurice in, getting a new head coach, kind of changing the identity of the franchise more so than it was about anything else.
I tend to agree with all of that. It also doesn't indict like whatever the Preds are going to do long term. Like we said this about John Hines all the time. Like John Hines might have been the right coach for that time to get to the next guy, and we don't know what the future of Andrew Burnett's going to hold. I mean, right now it's nothing but obvious success. And I think the most important part of that is Burnett was a tiny part of that previous regime, right? Like, yes, he was the interim coach, but really they're talking about sort of the entire organizational structure before that. I will say I don't think there's many teams, like Emma, to your point about offense. Like, yeah, they have offense too, but there's not many teams that could have locked down in the 4 games. In the 3 losses, they did not lock down Connor McDavid, although I guess they did again in Game 6. Draisaitl was largely ineffective. Didn't score a lot of goals, was not a huge part of the Oilers' push. It was an incredible performance. You can say that the offense was good for Florida, but the defense was extraordinary. To get those games and to contain Edmonton in those 4 wins the way they did, remarkable. I mean, they just, like, the shot attempts we're talking about shot attempt games and it's like 18-17 and like midway through the third period in half these games. So they did a great job. Bobrovsky was great too. But I just thought that was interesting because clearly, if you don't know anything about broadcasting, for those listening, clearly that was a talking point for Sean McDonough. When you're the play-by-play guy and the Panthers win a cup, and one of the first things you say is, well, so-and-so's in charge, and he decided that couldn't be the way they're going to win the cup. They couldn't play that style of hockey to win. And that's like your first line after the final whistle. It's clear that he's been prepped that way by talking to somebody about the direction of the franchise. And I just thought that was interesting because it does include the current head coach of the Nashville Predators. He's a part of that conversation, even if it's just a tiny one.
I think that's also too just like the narrative the team wants out there. Like, because they took a lot of heat for firing Burnett and bringing in Paul Maurice. I think that was also a backhanded way of being like, hey, we made the right decision. Y'all kind of came at us. I think we proved that we were right and you were wrong. And I think that was a backhanded way of throwing a jab out there at all the people that criticize him. Because when Paul Maurice was hired, like, everyone was saying exactly what we were saying. Like, Andrew Burnett was a Jack Adams finalist. They won the President's Trophy, took him to the playoffs. He took almost an impossible situation and got the most out of that team. Like, it made a lot of sense to bring him back. And they moved on from him and brought in someone who has been a decent coach, a pretty good coach in the NHL, but never really accomplished much. And they took a lot of heat for that. So I think that was their way of trying to tell everyone to be like, haha, we were right, you were wrong, basically.
Okay, I can get on board with that. I just thought it was interesting. That's one of the things that I'm watching the series and I'm tying it back to the Preds. That's the one thing that kept hitting me at the end. And plus, it's just fun to watch them skating around with the cup, right? Like, I mean, first of all, I was celebrating. I was in a very good place celebrating the Tennessee Volunteers national championship. And then I switch over and I watch the second and third period. And it's always fun to watch them skating the cup around, but like they kept repeating it. And it's not just one voice, it's multiple voices, which means it's clearly a very much a message that they were trying to get out there. Whether that's the truth or not, I don't know, but they played great defense against the best player in the world and they won a cup, and we'll see what happens. All right. So we're going to mix in some subscriber questions and preview the draft. I want to quickly ask both of you guys before we move to some subscriber questions on the draft, and we'll get a little bit deeper into some prospects, maybe a little bit later on in the week. But my question is, strategically, this Nashville Predators team on this particular draft, certainly they just traded away a pick to get a prospect. We'll get to that in a second. But at the end of the day, they still have a ton of picks in the top 100. They have a lot of flexibility, a lot of creativity. There's a lot of different strategies they could deploy. If you're sort of painting a perfect picture of what you want to see this team do, is it trading up into the first round using that capital to go all in on a single piece? Is it trading capital for a player that can help them today? Is it packaging picks to get a second first round pick? Like what is the strat? Is it all center? Is it all defense? What is the overarching couple of strategy bullet points that you want to see from this Preds team this weekend during the draft?
I think what I would like to see is them to be aggressive. Barry Trotz said it last year, and he tried to make some moves, but ultimately nothing really happened. I would like to see him be aggressive. You only have the 22 overall pick in the first round. You're down to 2 second-round picks because you traded one yesterday for Andrew Gibson, but you have multiple picks in the second, third, and fourth round, none in the fifth or sixth, then you don't pick again until the seventh. Package a couple of those second, third, fourth rounders, move up. Maybe you package the 22 overall pick and one of your second rounders and one of your third rounders to move up for someone that falls out of the top 10, like a Tisha Ginla, Berkeley Catton. I mean, if you're going defense and Zane Parikh falls out of the top 10, absolutely sell the farm, so to speak, to move up and get a guy like that. I'd like to see them be aggressive and take. I don't want to say they've never done stuff like that before, because I'm sure David Poile tried to make some of those moves as well. But I would like to see them try to do something that we haven't traditionally seen them move up. Maybe move up 1 or 2 picks in the first round or whatever. But I would like to see them jump 10 picks, get up into the top 10, 15 area somewhere in there, because that's the only place you're going to get some of these guys that they're usually not bad enough to draft. And I feel like this is a good draft because it's loaded with centers and defensemen, and they're the 2 biggest positions of need on this team. So if one of those coveted defensemen falls out of the top 10 or a center falls out of the top 10 that you normally wouldn't see floating around at like 12, 13, move up and get someone like that. I mean, the roster is pretty mostly set in stone. We think we know what we're going to get from this roster next year. You're going to need somebody in 2 or 3 years that can step in, that can potentially be a second, third line center. You're going to need to go out and find an Anton Lindell. We talk about Florida, someone like that. I think a lot of teams would take Anton Lindell as a second or third line center. If you can find someone like that, and I'm not saying Tisha Ginla or Berkeley Catton would be limited in that. I think they have top 6 potential. But if someone that good falls, I would like to see them be aggressive, go up and do that. You have the picks to do it. I don't think they're going to make both picks in the second, third, and fourth round. So why not trade them and get someone better?
Yeah, I think maybe just more broadly, I think that whatever they do should center around making this team better in like 3 to 4 years. I think that it should be now, whether that's packaging picks and trading them, to trade up in the first round to get a guy who can be on your team and make an impact in 3 years, or if it's packaging picks and whatever else to, trade for an RFA or trade for another player, or that ultimately go out in free agency and get a younger guy who can maybe who can help your team in that kind of timeline. I think that should be the focus, like just more broadly. And again, like I agree, be aggressive. Don't be aggressive just for the sake of it. Like I think it should be smart. It should be calculated, and it should be focused on making this team better in that 3 to 4 year window.
I've sort of come around on a couple of different strategies, because I think at first I was, go up like you, Gallagher, go up and get somebody that's sort of above the talent drop-off line, right? Wherever that talent drop-off line is in the first round, go up and get one of those guys. The top 5 or 6 defensemen could all be considered the best defensemen in last year's draft class. So that's really appealing to me. But that's also tied to what I think they should do, which is draft for need. And now I'm coming around on sort of switching both of those strategies, which is, to your point, Emma, draft the best available player. And you guys, great story on It's All Your Fault about the Kings not drafting the best available player. Draft the best available player. Yes, they need defense right now. Yes, they need size, which is literally what the Kings needed in that story that's on It's All Your Fault. Like, go draft the best player. And if that's a center, if that's a winger, if that's a defenseman, outside of goalie, draft the best possible prospect. I think that's number one. I've also come around on, if you can package all of these picks and get like 3 picks in the top 40, because right now they're outside of the top 50, right? Like if you could pick 22, 29, and 35, I sort of like casting a slightly wider net, but higher up the draft instead of like top 10. I could see that being a strategy. Michael, you've alluded to that with the LaRue draft, right? Where they went up and got LaRue late in the first round. So I could see that. I also love the idea of being aggressive to go get a piece that helps you today, like trade all these picks for Line A or trade all these picks for some of these guys that we've talked about on the past. And Barry Trotz said it publicly, I believe, on 102.5 this week. Hey, we're tied to these big names because we're tied to the big names. So they are interested in somebody. So who that is, we don't know yet. They're kicking the tires on everybody. So we'll see. I like to be aggressive, and I'd rather have like 2 top 30 picks than a bunch of picks in the 50s and 80s. So I've come around on, all right, give yourself 3 shots at it maybe instead of 8, but do it all in the top 40 if you could do that. Again, maybe that's not possible. I don't know. All right, Michael, if you had to pick at 22 right now today, give me the center you want at 22, the one name. I'm springing this on you.
I'm torn between Sasha Boisvert and Jet Luchenko. I would probably go Boisvert just because he's bigger, he's got the size factor, probably plays a little bit meaner. And I just think the scoring upside with him is probably a little bit higher than Luchenko. But I love Luchenko because he's speedy. He's kind of, I hate using the word like a pest, but he can fill that role. But I just think there's too much to like with Boisvert. He's probably one of the best pure goal scorers at the center position. And I know a lot of scouts, like he's slotted in that 20 to 25 range, but a lot of scouts said that if it was based purely off of talent, he'd probably be closer in the 12 to 15 range. So I'd probably go, if we're going just center, I would go with Boisvert.
If you want to read more details about either of those two guys and how they fit into the Nashville Predators system, Lower Broad Hockey over on Substack. Make sure you can check that out. Make sure you check that out. You can get all of Michael's prospect work over there. So you got lots of details about centermen and defensemen.
If you want to read more about defensemen, they could probably draft too. We have a story up there as well. I'll have one on the wingers coming too.
You're going too fast. If you could pick one defenseman, Michael, with the 22nd overall pick, which defenseman are you picking?
I'm probably going to go Stian Solberg. EJ Emery's really close, but I would go Solberg just because, I mean, everybody loves Jeremy Lauzon. Like, imagine a player like that, but who has a little bit more offensive upside and is a top pairing defenseman. The mean streak, the physical edge that he plays with everything, I would lean that way. But EJ Emery, I really like him too. So if he's there, I would give him some consideration.
Okay. All right. All right. Let's answer some of these subscriber questions here, folks. Number 1 from Josiah. Do you think Barry Trotz overpaid for Gibson? They traded from Detroit, Andrew Gibson, 19 years old, played in the OHL last year. He was the 42nd overall pick. They gave up the 2nd round pick, which I believe is 53rd overall on Friday from Tampa Bay. That's their highest pick in the 2nd round, as well as a prospect, Jesse Kiskinen. Guys, what did you make of that? Josiah wants to know, did they overpay? I don't know if you can overpay when you're trading 2 prospects and a 2nd round draft pick, but Gibson does seem like he fits what this team needs in the farm system.
Yeah, I'll go first just because I had something come up and I have to hop out here in a few minutes, but I don't think he overpaid. Kiskinen's really young. I just didn't really see him playing a role on the Predators at any point in the next 5 years. I know he's had some success in international tournaments and stuff like that, but I didn't really see him kind of fitting in with the roster. But paying a 2nd round pick is a little bit of a steep price, but also Gibson was a 2nd round pick. And what we talked about, 2 things that Barry Trotz is looking for in some of the defensemen he's acquiring now is size and a little bit of offensive upside. Gibson's got really good mobility. He's defensively responsible. He's got some pretty smooth skating. He's really good at reading plays in the defensive zone. He plays mean and physical. He's 6'3", like all the things that, I mean, I think it was easy to connect the dots with Zadorov when we're talking about getting size, but I don't think Zadorov is like, I think he's on the radar. I don't think he's a really good possibility. And again, Gibson's not someone who's going to jump into the lineup next year, but you're talking 2 or 3 years from now, you're going to have that physical presence, that guy that's over 6 foot tall, that's going to be on the 2nd or 3rd pairing in the back end. So I think it was a good trade. I don't think you overpaid for it. To your point, Braden, I think it's hard to say you overpaid when you're basically swapping 2 prospects who no one really knows that much about at this point.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Shane Brown asks, and Michael, I know you got to go here in a second, but I thought this was perfect for you. Do the Predators have any legitimate top 6 prospects in Milwaukee? If so, what do you see in that player's game that leads you to believe they actually could be a top 6 player? I think there's only 2 names that I considered here, Michael. What do you think?
If we're going top 6, I feel like that's a broad statement just because Cody Glass was in the top 6 last year at different points. I mean, it's just, if we're going true, let's just say top line players, I think there's only one, and it's Joakim Kemmel. I think, and look, I know everyone wants to talk about he had a down year and they were a little bit disappointed, and I get it. But he came over at 19, going into Milwaukee, and he came from the J20 National League, and he was. I get being disappointed, but also like you got to keep in mind the kid is very young. He came over at a very young age. He took a big step up in competition. I think he's someone that's going to take a little bit. He's going to need that extra year. And I know it's a tough subject talking about Igor Afanasyev, given that he was just traded. But look what happened with Afanasyev. It took him 2 years before he finally put it all together, had the scoring output people were expecting from him. I think it's going to be the same with Kemmel. I think next year is going to be the year he really comes into his own and proves that he can be that top line player that he was drafted to be, frankly. And if we're looking at other players fitting into the top 6, not necessarily like a Connor McDavid type player, but someone who I think could be a top 6 forward, I would probably go Svechkov. I was really tempted to put Leroux in there. I think he's got the skills to do it, but I just think taking the dumb penalties and getting all the game misconducts and all the headache stuff that comes with him is going to ultimately work against him. I think he's going to be a good bottom 6 player. Like, I think he could be a really good third line winger, offer scoring upside. I think that's going to work against Leroux. But with Svechkov, I saw actual tangible growth this year. The beginning of the season, I didn't really have any expectations. I was like, well, he didn't play a lot his last year in Russia, everything that happened with that. And then I saw him grow as a goal scorer. I saw him grow as a playmaker. I saw him do some things, find some like when they're skating towards the net or whatever, and you have a couple guys that are open. He made good reads, crisp passes. I saw a lot of growth that I really like, and I think next year it could be another year where he could have a breakout year, and we're possibly talking about him being on the roster 2 years from now.
Yeah, I think it's Kemmel. I think Kemmel's the maybe Matthew Wood if he delivers on all of his potential, but Kemmel and the reason why, the shot. You got to have something that makes you special. You got to have something that makes you different than everybody else to play in the top 6 and be considered a top 6 player on the NHL level. And Kemmel's really the only one right now in the farm system that I see a skill that says, you're playing alongside Evangelista and maybe a big name they go get or whatever, right? And that you're worthy of playing up there, and a lot of room to grow. Well, Matthew Wood has got a chance, but we shall see.
I'll leave you on this as I head out. I had an interview with a scout from McKean's Hockey yesterday, and we talked about Matthew Wood. Have a story up on Lower Broad Hockey talking about this in a little bit, probably tomorrow actually. But the whole debate about playing wing, playing center, got some really good insight onto, because he played both. I think they drafted him as a winger with the hope of moving him to center, and I have some really good insight coming in a story breaking it down a little bit on what his best position is, and how he fits and stuff. And we talk about his skating and how that could be like, for a lot of times it could be, a player's own worst enemy because they can't skate, they can't get their feet under them, all that stuff. We're going to have a story breaking all that down with some really good insight into Matthew Wood, because I feel like people want to know about him and there's not really a lot of coverage on him. So we got a great story coming to Lower Broad Hockey probably Thursday morning, breaking down Matthew Wood as well as Askarov and Kemmel and some of those other guys.
Well, and we'll talk about Askarov here. Emma and I will be about him being back on the block or Saros contract situation. We got a couple more questions from you guys. Of course, if you're in the comments, there's a couple of questions about Andrew Gibson as well. Ultimately about Matthew Wood, it's like, can you drive play? Can you drive play and be in control of the offense? Because I think that's ultimately my question about Matthew Wood. And maybe the answer is yes. I don't know. We'll see. I'll have to tune in. Lower Broad Hockey, of course, for the piece and the article. There you go. And we'll have more stuff on the draft coming. So you got centers, yes, and you got defensemen. We'll have wingers and goalies and some strategy stuff, as well as some scouting stuff coming up. Lower Broad Hockey over on Substack. Mike, always a pleasure, my man. Thanks for hanging out.
All right, I got to go. See you guys. And then if anyone's asked any questions I didn't get to, I will be in the group chat on Substack answering all those as well.
The group chat, baby. That thing's already fun. I like hanging out in the group chat. It's very strange to be a 41-year-old being like, yeah, let's check out this group chat.
See, look at that. We just got a comment. How do you join Lower Broad Hockey? Now I'll leave it up to you as I peace out.
There you go. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you, man. Okay, Emma, how can people find Lower Broad Hockey? What would you say to that? By the way, go. By the way, I love Gover bringing it up. He didn't tell everybody it's over on Substack. You got to tell people it's over on Substack.
Yeah, I wasn't quite prepared for that. He's like, tell us about it. I was like,
No, you did it. You were perfect. You hit all the great, wonderful talking points. Premium experience for Predators fans,
yeah,
to hang out and communicate and build a little place where we all know more about the Preds than anybody else does. And that's what we're trying to build for folks, is a little bit of fun, an approachable hockey community for people that are not the diehards that don't know what a Corsi score is, but also a place where we can really break down prospects and stuff that is in depth as well. So we're trying to make it for everyone to be there to be a Preds fan, no matter how into it you are. And that's the goal. And so Taylor, how can you join Lower Broad Hockey? Lower Broad Hockey on Substack. There you go. Check it out. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Lower Broad Pucks. All right, Emma, can we do that? Did I get that right?
Yeah. That's what I was going to add. I was like, I have one thing to add, and then you took it, but that's okay.
Sorry. Well, just ask my wife what that's like for the last 12 years. Josh says he's looking forward to the Matthew Wood story. Yeah, Michael did a really interesting interview with some scouts, and we'll find out what that is. Josh Wright also says, I like the conviction. This is about the Andrew Gibson trade, of course. A second-round pick from the Detroit Red Wings that they went and got this week. The price they paid tells me that they really like the player. Emma, we'll get to the Hall of Fame with Shea Weber and with David Poile, and then we'll get to the Igor Afanasyev trade, because I know you had a chance to talk to him after the trade, and again, a guy that I think most people are rooting for in general. But a couple of more subscriber questions here I want to get to, because I had the most fun with this particular question, and I found one thread and theme that I've actually already started working on a story for folks, because I think this is one of the keys and the secrets to the Preds' success. So Brad Jones says, for both of us, Emma, is basically what are some of the gems that have been drafted by the Nashville Predators over the year? Your top three is what he asked for, found in the draft over the last decade. I had to go back a little bit further, not necessarily the top picks, but the ones that maybe were not day one targets by scouts, but ended up making a surprise impact at the top level as a Predator. Do you have some names, or do you want me to go ahead and list off the group? Because I think there's a very specific group of players that fit this question's category.
I mean, I think maybe I would like to know some of the parameters, because obviously we're not going to talk about first rounders. I get that. But would we consider a guy in the second round to be a gem? Because Roman Josi wasn't really on anyone's top, the top of anyone's list on day one of that draft. He was a second round pick. And I remember talking to David Poile about drafting Roman, and he basically said, yeah, I know a lot of GMs right now would love to go back and redo that draft, but we got him. And so, I mean, there's that. I would say, if you're willing to go as high as a second round, I would say, Roman Josi, Luke Evangelista, guys like that. I really I know that he has yet to make a big impact, but I think there's still time. I really, really like Juuso Parssinen in the seventh round. I think that he was a guy, again, we'll see, what his impact is moving forward. But I think that when he came up, he just blew everyone out of the water when he came up to the NHL. And looked like, I've said this before, looked like a man among boys. You never would have guessed that it's how did people sleep on this guy for 7 rounds before they finally get him? So, and then there's the obvious answer of Pekka in the now non-existent 8th round.
So if you go back to, because he did say the last decade. So if you want to follow the letter of Brad's question, I think there are 2 major names that stand out, because I agree with you. If you're going to talk about Roman Josi and Luke Evangelista, I think Tommy Novak was a 3rd round pick, so maybe there's certainly some value there. I mean, there are guys if you're going to be Roman Josi good, then yes, you're a gem in the 2nd round. But you have to be Norris caliber, you have to be elite. But Pekka's the answer for the entire franchise's history. But that's literally 20 years ago. 8th round pick. Patrick Hornquist was the very next year as a 7th round pick in 2005. I would limit it to a couple of names here. And honestly, what was fun about this exercise was pulling on a thread that I'm already sort of curious to pull on in my mind, which is their ability to scout European players. That their scouting department in Europe seems to be better than most, or at least among the best. And there's some guys that have been doing it for 20 plus years. They're the same guys that are in that European scouting department that found Pekka Rinne and Patrick Hornquist, which is why I think they should be included in this conversation. Matthias Ekholm, 2009 4th round pick. Guy was 1 game away from a cup, playing on maybe the best defense pairing in the NHL right now. You have to say Matthias Ekholm with the 4th round pick is a clear, huge gem of a find by David Poile in his scouting department. Craig Smith was also drafted in that same 4th round, by the way, but I'm not going to count him because he's from Canada. UC Saros, 2013, 4th-round pick. Victor Arvidsson, 2014, 4th-round pick. What do Victor Arvidsson, UC Saros, Matthias Ekholm, Patrick Hornquist, and Pekka Rinne all have in common? They all are from Europe. And what I find interesting is the job this franchise has done in finding really good value in the middle to late rounds with players from Europe that not only turn into contributors, but to some of the best and most important players in franchise history. That list of names, they don't go to the Cup without that list of names.
Yeah, makes you wonder now if they made a mistake by trading 3rd-round pick Jesse Kiskinen. I don't think they did, but yeah, it's there's definitely some good names in there for sure.
So ultimately, Brad Jones, thanks for the question. Those Arvidsson and Saros are the two most recent ones. Do they need some more hits like Juuso Parssinen? Like Parssinen still needs to hit in theory, but I like his potential. Like you, they still like if you look at the last 5-6 drafts, there is not a glaring name that is a bona fide star that they found like a Pekka or an Ekholm or a Hornquist. So they need another wave of that. And so we'll see with these last year's draft class, this draft class, and the next draft class. They have so many picks. They got to hit on some of them. And I'm just going, all right, who's going to be the 4th-round player from Switzerland that's really, really good that no one's talking about? Because the story on Pekka is they just kept waiting because they're like, no, we don't need to take him. Like they wanted him the whole time, but the story on him is that like they were like, no, we don't need to take him right now. We can wait until the end. And because they were like, nobody knows him, nobody cares, nobody wants him. We do, and we feel better about our evaluation. And those are the same guys scouting European hockey today for the Predators. They're the same team of scouts. Yeah. So I'll be pulling on that thread this summer for sure because I want to introduce those guys to the Nashville Predators fan base as well. So okay, so that's another good one there. And then. Do you have an answer about the top 6? Do you see a top 6 forward, Emma, in the farm system right now? Because I think a lot of people were very optimistic about that question a few years ago, and there's still some questions now, I think, a few years later.
Yeah, I mean, my answer was also going to be Kemmel. He's the only one that, to me, is like that I feel confident saying that. I love that shot. I could watch that all day. Yeah. But I mean, he's not just a one-trick pony either. I mean, he is very skilled and he's going to be good. I think he's going to be an impact player.
Yeah. He's the one that I circled. I don't think you can circle anybody else on that list. Like I like LaRue. I'm with Michael. I like Svechkov. I like Matthew Wood, but I think there's a chance that a lot of those guys are just sort of solid contributors, not the guy that we think of as an elite top 6 player. And I think Kemmel's the one that has that kind of ability, but we'll see. Matthew Wood still has an opportunity to grow into that. We'll see, but you guys know me. I'm a Tanner Molendyke all the way. That's my guy. All right. Tyler Davis asks, with the pending signing of Saros, is Askarov back on the table as a potential trade? Sort of an interesting question there, Emma, because it's a loaded question with the phrase the pending signing of Saros. As we've told you on the show, I'm not sure how close they are on dollars. And if you're Barry Trotz, your job is to be prepared for all things. How do you feel about that question? Both the assumption that Saros' signing is pending and that what does it do to the organization if he does get signed?
Well, I would agree with the assumption that the signing is pending. I don't think it's pending July 1st. But I think, we've seen just in the last week, a lot of the potential suitors for Saros are now off the board. I mean, Ottawa, Toronto, New Jersey, LA, like all these teams that needed bona fide starting goalies have already gotten them, and gotten them at, a more reasonable price than I'm sure Trotz was asking for Saros. So I think that,
and rightly so, by the way.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that he is going to be re-signing with Nashville. But I think that Barry Trotz is playing the long game here. And I think that that's smart because he has the luxury of time. He's still under contract for 1 more year. So they don't have to rush to do anything with him. It almost makes sense to wait longer as much as we may hate the uncertainty, and the longer Saros remains unsigned, the more, the Predators are going to be linked to every single name that becomes available, either on the trade market or the free agent market, because they have the cap space to do it. And they have this massive, trade chip potentially. I genuinely don't think Saros is going anywhere. But again, I don't expect him, to be signing July 1st, only because the longer you wait, if you're Barry Trotz, the longer you wait, the more his value almost, I don't want to say goes down, but these other teams, we've already seen it, are going to get impatient and they're going to go out and get their guys. And now they don't have as big of a need for Saros, and they don't have the money necessarily to throw at him. So I think that he's going to stay in Nashville. Again, we just have to be patient with that news. But to the second part of that question with Askarov, I think Askarov has always been on the trading block. I mean, not in the sense that he's definitely getting traded, but I think that he has always been available. Ever since Barry Trotz came in, I think so. Yeah, I don't want to say always. I would say always under Barry Trotz. Askarov has been dangled out there. And now he's a guy, and I've said this before, he's a guy that I think you actually can get a very reasonable haul for. They're going to be asking too much for Saros, and by too much, I mean more than other teams are willing to pay. Askarov is a guy that, you could probably ask for a little bit more of a reasonable return, but he's kind of in that sweet spot where he's shown this elite skill and this elite potential, but he's also a little bit of a question mark. So there are teams that'll overpay for him. So I think that he's a guy, again, I'm not saying definitely he's getting traded, but I would say I would not be surprised in the slightest if he is.
No, it's also the Saros signing thing. There's also windows. I agree with you. They can wait till after the first. In fact, I think this should probably be their strategy. We'll talk more about this next week. But I think their strategy should be to probably wait until the second wave of free agents, because the salary cap has crunched so many teams that there's a lot of players that are asking for $6 million that aren't going to get signed in the first wave, and then you might be able to get them for 4.5 or 5 or something like that in the second wave. So once that all happens and sort of the dominoes start to fall into place, or the puzzle pieces start to fall into place, I'll pick the right Child's Game analogy at some point. I think that's where Saros's value goes down a little bit, because you have some leverage because he doesn't have as much. But then if you wait too long and all of a sudden you're into the season and all of a sudden you get near the trade deadline, maybe there's an injury, maybe there's a team that does become desperate for a goaltender, then all of a sudden his leverage could go back up again. So there is a second window where the leverage game could change for Barry Trotz. The calculus could change for Barry Trotz. I think in the short term, in the summer, absolutely. You wait till that second week of free agency, let all the puzzle pieces fall. Maybe you get Saros for a slightly less, or he agrees to maybe not add the no trade clause, let's say, because I'm assuming that's part of the negotiations right now with those guys as well. I think it's 50-50 right now, honestly, because if Saros wants $9 million and Trotz is like, no, we'll give you 6, at some point you're just too far away on money. And maybe you have to move him for something. So I honestly don't know what they're going to do. I'm curious. I think it does tie into Renegade's question as well, and that was Taylor's question. Renegade asks, what's the one player you would go out and acquire this offseason? I will have a story up on Lower Broad Hockey coming this week. I'll be making the case for the player that I think they should go get, so go subscribe. I'll probably make that one free for all you guys because, it's my writing. It's not that big a deal. But if you want Emma and Mike, you gotta subscribe. You gotta get the premium experience for Emma and Mike. I do think that if they go acquire a big piece, there has to be a lot, the risk has to be extremely low, and there has to be sort of a lot of different options. There has to be outs. And because I think you don't really know what direction the franchise is going yet. I still don't think you know where you are in the Central Division. I still you can't get rid of Ryan McDonough and be like, yeah, we're going to be just as good next year. That's why I'm still 50-50 on Saros, because there's a chance they tear the whole thing down. If they have to trade Saros, they're going deeper into the rebuild, which isn't necessarily a terrible idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's There's a chance, yes. I don't think it's a very good chance personally, but I think
Okay.
there is a chance. I do understand that they are still, not seeing eye to eye on dollars right now. I do think it was maybe a little bit of a mistake for Saros's agent, not a mistake, but maybe just kind of a misguided decision to come out and say we're waiting until the Rangers extend Igor Shesterkin before, like to kind of set our price. And it's like, well, okay, I'm not going to sit here and argue whether Shesterkin or Saros is a better goalie. But there are certain things you can't ignore. Shesterkin has had longer playoff runs. And now that alone, that's not UC Saros's fault necessarily, but like we've seen more of him in the playoffs.
I think clearly the Rangers are a far better coached team,
Yeah, I mean they've been
I'm kidding.
I know. But they have been, he's been into the playoffs longer and we've seen more from him. He's also got a Vezina trophy, which UC Saros does not. And again, not saying he hasn't played well enough to deserve one, but it's just those are the things that you can't really ignore when you're looking. So it's like that's why I think Saros has been compared to Hellebuck so much, because Hellebuck also has a Vezina trophy, but he doesn't have the playoff, longevity that Shesterkin has, but he's also, used to the extent that Saros is.
Do you think Shesterkin is in the Bobrovsky territory? That's $10 million a year. Like, I don't think look, two things are very important: a Vezina trophy and a playoff series win. Those are two things UC Saros does not have, and so those are extremely. If I'm Barry Trotz at the negotiating table, you bet your ass I'm putting those things on the table and saying, look, he went and got $9 million a year, but he has this, this, and this. You don't have any of that, so we'll give you 7.5. Mm-hmm. That's how these are, and this is why you have lawyers, because you don't ever want to be like. This is why the arbitration things are so strange, because you have to like sit there as a general manager and a coach who wants the player to be on their team, and you have to say all the most negative things possible about this player, because you're trying to convince the arbiter to like lower the price, even though you really want the player on your team. It's just it's just weird. Like, contracts are designed to, assume the worst possible case scenario, when you have to, as a player and a team, assume the best possible scenario if you really want to work together. So it's just weird. It's just a weird situation. So I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do.
I don't know if Shesterkin is $10 million a year. I could see him getting 8.5 easily. Maybe 9, but
I think so too.
I think Saros is going to be less than that for all the reasons that we just mentioned. I think if you can get Saros 6 years, $8 million a year, I do it. I would do it.
Yeah, I could see that. And then you could move Askarov for something pretty nice, or you bring Askarov in and you let him be the backup for a year or two, and then maybe there's another trade window for Saros down the road. I mean, there's a lot of flexibility here with the Preds. Some of the flexibility, it's same thing with the draft. Some of this flexibility can be very frustrating because there's no real true path. There's no clear direction and distinct direction. Because even Max says here, look, I get what you guys are saying, but we have Yossi, Forsberg, and O'Reilly with some more good players. Could we push for the cup? I don't think they can push for the cup with like one more good player. If they have 2 or 3 more really good players, like you go get a Patrick Laine and a Brandon Montour, and then maybe somebody else, maybe you can contend. I don't think you are better than Colorado or Vegas or Edmonton. Like, I don't think you are. Frankly, strangely enough, on defense, I don't think they're good enough, which I've never said as a Nashville Predators organization ever, but I don't think they are.
Well, and that's one thing I want to go back to quickly, to circle back to the Andrew Gibson trade. I really like that trade.
I do too.
I like it a lot, because I think for a number of reasons. Like, number one, he's got that size that you're looking for on defense, like 6'3", 196. He's a big boy. Then you've got the fact that he did sign his ELC with Detroit last year, so he is under team control for 2 more years.
Keep going, Emma. You're talking my language.
He's closer to being there than Kiskinen ever would have been. Kiskinen wasn't even signed to a contract yet. And so I think that he adds size. he adds scoring touch. He adds that depth on the blue line, which, as you've said, that's something that the Predators need to work on rebuilding. But then at the same time, he fits in that 3 to 4 year window that I'm talking about. He's not going to come and make an impact in Nashville next year. That's not going to happen. But that's okay. You don't need him to. You need him in like 3 to 4 years. And that's where,
or even 2.
Even 2, but I think that I like that trade a lot. And also, I think it's interesting. Detroit has already gone and flipped that second round pick again. They sent it to San Jose in a trade yesterday. So
look, the pick they traded was the highest second round pick. So the 53rd overall, they still have 55 and 59, but again, that's about the same. But again, like Andrew Gibson was drafted 42nd overall. So in theory, just based on draft capital, you've moved up to grab this guy. I love the idea. Yes. Team control with a contract, a year into a system. He played in the OHL last year, 68 games, 12 goals, 32 assists, so he can create offense. You mentioned the size already. That's what they're looking for as well. Plus 36 with playoff experience at that level. Checks a lot of boxes.
He's also a right shot defenseman because you lost McDonough. You're probably going to lose Carrier. Like it all fits. I think, people saying like, oh, did they overpay by giving up a second round pick? No, because a second round pick this year is not going to help your team as quickly as Andrew Gibson is. So I like it. I like it. No. And to tie into the rest of this conversation, I think that it fits with the idea that like you said, there's always a chance, but I don't think it's a good chance that they're going to go and tear the whole thing down right now, because you're still going to try to push with the guys that you have, and I think that is, like you said, they're not just one player away. They're not one Patrick Laine away from going straight to the cup. But if you can, package picks, whatever you can do to get more guys in there, I think that there's a decent possibility that you can still push for the cup with those core guys, the Yossi's, the Forsbergs, the Saroses that you have right now.
Yeah. So Taylor says, how many years do you guys think Gibson will be before he'll be ready for the NHL? There's no way that any of us have any clue. But here's what I would say in general. If you draft a defenseman 42nd overall, you then sign him to his entry-level contract, and he shows promise in that first season as a 19-year-old, I think it is reasonable to expect any player in that situation at 21 years old, after your third year of being a professional athlete, developing in a system, that you are ready to test the waters in the NHL. I just think that's a general, like, some guys are ready sooner, some guys take a little longer. But I think in general, by the end of your third pro season, if you're a top 50 pick and you're showing promise in your first season and the team appreciates you enough to sign you, I think age 21, which would be 2 seasons from now, at the end of that year, that's his third year in the pros, quote unquote. I think that's when you can start to say, all right, expectations are we should begin to hear about you challenging for some time in the NHL. So I think that's
you gotta see what he does in the AHL first. I mean, that's sure. A huge, question mark that could sway the answer to that question. But I think in general, if you have to put kind of a timeline on it, I think that's reasonable.
All right. The other trade was Igor Afanasyev. Of course, they trade him to San Jose. Just on a personal level, we can discuss Igor, the individual, which I think everyone's rooting for. But at the end of the day, I think this is about space. My opinion is you got Philip Tomasino, Juuso Parssinen, and Igor Afanasyev, none of whom have waiver claims left. And so if they're going to try out for the team and one of them makes the team, none of them can go back down to Milwaukee without clearing waivers. You just don't have that much space for these guys in general. Especially if you think you're going to go sign somebody, even if it's just bringing back Jason Zucker, for example. Like you don't, and Kiefer Sherwood, you don't have that many winger spot or forward spots left. And if you can go get somebody with control versus somebody without control, I think that ultimately is where you're at. And at the end of the day, if this is something that Igor's okay with, like if you had a chance to talk to him, so you can tell me. But if I went to a young player and said, look, we don't have space for you here. This guy, and this guy is what our plan is. But over on this other team, you might have a chance to play a lot and showcase your skills. I would assume most players at that age would take the opportunity to prove themselves, even if it's on a bad team, I think. And I don't know if that's the vibe you got from him or not.
Yeah, and I think that like you said, it's about space. You mentioned Tomasino, Parsonen, but then you've also got kind of question marks like, is Tommy Novak going to end up on the wing? Because he was playing there a lot towards the end of the year. Is Cody Glass going to end up on the wing? Like a lot of guys that really could be competing for those spots, like you said, not to mention who you might get in free agency. So I think that this was a chance, or this was an instance of doing what was right for the team, but like you said, also doing right by the player, because Igor can go and be a top 6 forward on San Jose's NHL roster right now. He can. And I don't think that, or at least I will say he can go and legitimately compete for a top 6 spot on San Jose's NHL roster right now. He wasn't realistically going to be doing that here in Nashville. And I think that you have a guy like that, and as much as I hate to say it, because again, love Igor the person and think he does have a lot of potential, it's all about fit within an organization and organizational depth. And I think that where he was with the Predators organization, and we've talked about this before, but when we were talking about Phil Tomasino, but I think it applies here too, that he is a perfect candidate, for a guy who can go for a change of scenery trade and really just have a clean slate. He's never going to have a clean slate. Just the fact that he came up for Nashville, played 17 games last year, 2 games this year, only got 1 point.
Yeah.
And that's not good. and I think like the one thing,
the analysis you come to us for, folks.
Yeah, subscribe to Lower Broad Hockey.
1 point, not good.
Yep. Yeah, follow me for more hot takes.
No verbs necessary.
No, I think that he is a guy that like, I don't know how much this is going to move the needle, frankly, but I think that the one thing that Tomasino has over Afanasyev is that Tomasino has seen success at the NHL level. It was very fleeting and it hasn't been consistent. But if we're looking at guys like, okay, if we have to roll the dice on one of these guys, let's roll the dice. And that's not to say that Tomasino won't still be traded. He still could be. But
and I think to your point, though, he also has that other thing. It's not just does he have a little bit more NHL success. He's got a little bit more trade value. So you hold on to him a little longer. So I think that's,
Absolutely. So whether he has more value, whether it's for your team or on the trade market, I think he's a guy that you hold on to. And for Igor, I think, they've traded his signing rights now to San Jose. He's got a clean slate. He's got a path to the NHL. Like, in Nashville, his chances of making the NHL roster this year were very slim, like outside chances, much less making it to the top 6, which is kind of what the Predators had projected for him. Now he goes to San Jose and he has a much clearer path. So I think it's a good thing for him. I think, after talking to him, I think he is very happy to have a clean slate and to be able to go out and really prove himself.
Here's how I would look at those 3 players if I'm a Predators fan through the eyes of the Predators front office. You kind of had to move Igor for a piece that you now have a little bit more control over. He's just you're taking a shot at a prospect to like build up the farm system. Okay, great. I think you have to view Juuso Parssinen as a player that you want to make the starting lineup. You want Juuso Parssinen to develop and to be a player that is on the big club's roster this year. Whether he's a top 6 or a bottom 6 or a starter or contributor, largely irrelevant, but that he proves that he's got staying power to be on the team. I think that's what you want. And I think you want to see Philip Tomasino packaged in a deal for a player that helps you win now. That's sort of how I would look at those 3 players. You're going to move Igor because he's not worth a ton to you to sort of gain a prospect. You want Parssinen on the team and you want Tomasino to help you get better, probably in a trade. I think that's how you should look at those 3.
I totally agree. I think that's why I threw out, I think it was last week, I threw out there, when the Preds still had 3 second-round picks, but take all 3 second-rounders and Tomasino, send him to Columbus, get Laine. I would do it. But I think that, I
think there's a lot to like about that.
Right?
Very, very low risk, very high reward.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of moves I appreciate in professional sports.
Yes.
Okay, a couple of other moves we appreciate. By the way, sign up, Lower Broad Hockey on Substack. Go check it out. We've got a user and subscriber only group chat. You get Michael's work, you get Emma's work, you get my stuff over there. We're going to have more news for you at the end of the summer. We have big plans for you guys. We're going to have additional videos and podcasts. We're going to have writing. We know you folks consume this stuff in very different ways. Some people love reading. Some people love listening. Some people love watching. We're going to have all that stuff for you. We're also going to have, of course, again, the private group chat where you get preference if, of course, you're a subscriber. We shout out to Kevin, a founding member of the website. He goes to the top of the list no matter what. If you're a founding member, you go to the top of the list. You get a price lock, and I might give you some gossip about what's coming in September. So make sure you subscribe, Lower Broad Hockey, over on the Substack app. The app is the best way to do it. You get the app, you can kind of jump on there, and we can interact all day. You can read the content. It gets sent right to your email box. It is a premium experience, and I promise you, the summer stuff's going to be good, but the fall stuff's going to be even better. So we got a lot of big stuff planned for you guys.
And so it will be more than just 1 point not good. I promise.
That's the whole email. Emma's going to send an email. It's just going to be like 1 point equals not good. We're just using emojis.
Just dropping bombs, just dropping knowledge bombs on you guys.
So I correct me if I'm wrong. And Mitch, let's see here. Let me make sure I read this before I put it on the air. I've had the mistake of doing that before where I didn't read a comment and I just threw it up there and it's gotten me in trouble. Mitch says, as long as Saros gets the no movement clause, and not a modified no movement clause, not a full no movement clause, I think the Preds can still look to Askarov for the future. I think Josh alluded to that as well earlier. 6 years still works for a transition to Askarov, even with no trade. Players waive those all the time. They can move Saros in the end if it's clear that Askarov is the guy. I think that's absolutely a possibility. I think it maximizes your team's ability to win right now? Maybe not, but I do think that gives you a lot of stability in the long term. I think I'd rather have like a 5-year deal for Saros, and then Askarov can, 5 years, $40 million. I think that's fair. That's 8 AAV, and then you've got an ability to either trade him in the future or, start transitioning, much like you did with Pekka. It's not that hard. Okay, quickly. Shea Weber, Hall of Famer. Congratulations. David Poile, Hall of Famer. No real conversation needed around David Poile. We've spent literally 15 years talking about it. But I am curious. The one thing that I'm interested with Shea Weber, of course, and I checked this. I think I got this right. The Hockey Hall of Fame chooses what you go in as. In baseball, for example, the player picks the team they want to represent in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. And I think the NHL, or the Hockey Hall of Fame, excuse me, not the NHL, the Hockey Hall of Fame picks. Who is the Hockey Hall of Fame going to pick for Shea Weber?
I would think Nashville, just because he was a captain. Hope. I mean, he was a captain, and that was the organization that drafted him, I think. And plus, I mean, not that this means anything at all, but when the Hall of Fame tweeted it yesterday, it was a picture of him in his Preds uniform. So I would think, as much as we would love him to go in as, Utah Hockey Club legend Shea Weber, because he is still under contract with them for 2 years.
Which, by the way, is still pretty good for the Preds, right? It means they don't have to pay any of that money. No, so 5 seasons in Montreal, 275 games played. They did get to the first Stanley Cup in franchise history, or in the franchise for like 30 years. 11 seasons in Nashville, 763 games, a captain, I believe like a 5-time, 6-time, how many All-Stars, Norris finalist, 3-time finalist, I believe, for the Norris. He's among the franchise leaders all time, obviously. It just sort of feels like he's the first Pred to go into the Hall of Fame sort of regardless of what the Hockey Hall of Fame chooses. It just sort of feels weird that like a big chunk of his accomplishment is going to be considered his Montreal, and he's a Canadian and the roots there. And I just, it's sort of like, well, when Pekka gets called up and he gets the call and he gets in, if he does, then there's like no, like, you know what I mean? Like there's the no doubter, I played every game kind of deal. So I just think congrats to Shea Weber. Couldn't happen to a better guy, more deserving. But 3 times as many games, I think you have to go in I think they have to put him in as a Predator.
I think so too. And regardless of what the Hall of Fame chooses for him, he is still, either way, the first Milwaukee Admiral to make it into the Hall of Fame. So we can at least have that.
There you have it. So that's a perfect way to end it. Congrats to David Poile. and to I think it was Pavel Datsyuk and Jeremy Roenick as well, the other 2 players that got in.
Yep.
Some American female hockey players getting in as well, which is great. Not a lot of those, so that's cool. So a lot of cool stuff there for Poyle and for Weber to go in. I think it's also appropriate that they go in together. I think that's really nice and really good. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with 2 Preds going in the same class potentially. So that's pretty cool. Otherwise, where can the good folks find you, Emma?
The good folks can find me, as I mentioned, on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Emma_Lingen, same handle, both places. And you can find me at Lower Broad Hockey as well.
There you go. Lower Broad Hockey, Lower Broad Pucks on the socials if you want to give us a follow there. But really, the community is the place to be. That's where all the writing is going to be. That's where all the podcasts are going to be. The videos are going to be there. We're going to have a prospect almanac. We got the group chat. We're going to try to put together some in-person events and some merchandise as well. So we got lots of stuff planned for you guys over there. We want it to be a one-stop shop community for all things Nashville Predators. Whether you're a diehard or a casual, whether you want to learn more about the game or know everything there is to know about the game, we want it to be a home for all of you folks because I don't think there's anything like it in the market right now. And we're going to do the best job we can to make your experience as valuable as possible. But we can't do it without your support. So got to have your support, folks. And we do appreciate all you guys jumping into the comments as well. So if you're watching on YouTube, thumbs up, subscribe, share the show. We do appreciate you guys. If you're on the podcast as well, rate, review, and subscribe as well. So otherwise, I think that just about does it for us. We're going to have some other stuff on the website previewing the draft. So that's where you go get the content now. We're going to have daily coverage of the Nashville Predators over there. So make sure you check that out. Other than that, I think that just about does it. For Michael and for Emma, my name is Braden Gall. Thank you guys all for listening. We will talk to you very, very soon over at Lower Broad Hockey. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate it.